Now you're very welcome along to Team 33. Enda Coll here with you for the next hour or so. Coming up on tonight's show, we are going to be talking about the Ireland draw with Portugal 0-0 in the Aviva Stadium. Quite a impressive performance from Ireland despite not being able to get the win in the end, but I think the evidence is clear that things are starting to improve under Stephen Kenny, and the train is starting to rumble on, as they say. We're also going to be talking about Póg Mo Goal, Ireland's only football magazine. The new issue is out, and that's coming up later on the show. But I'm joined by James Carew from Póg Mo Goal now. James, how are you getting on?
I'm good, Enda. Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's good to have you back on. So we usually have you back on every year when this new magazine comes out. So again, a new issue, Póg Mo Goal. It's a very nice piece to look at. Firstly, anybody who's on camera and watching on YouTube will see it. It's a yellow cover this time, but some great writing in here. We might touch on it later on, but the Ireland game last night, were you watching the 0-0 draw?
I sure was. Yeah, I'm based in London, so kind of watching it on Sky, but also getting the feedback from people at home. I think, like you said, it was really impressive, wasn't it? It was just nice to watch. We played some brilliant stuff. No, none more so than Shane Duffy. I thought he was probably my man of the match. He was spraying balls, and it was almost John O'Shea on Figo-esque, where he kind of did he do a Cruyff turn on Ronaldo at one point. I mean, if that doesn't sum up how far we've come and where we're going, I don't think anything does.
Yeah, I have a bit of it irks me a little bit when people the Cruyff turn, I think, has been overused. I'm not sure if you can classify it fully as a Cruyff turn. I would have it more as the Ronaldo chop, to use a modern version of it, but I'm not sure if it was a complete Cruyff turn, but impressive nonetheless. I mean, it's Shane Duffy doing it
Absolutely.
on Ronaldo, so it's exciting to watch. I always look at the stats, and I know some people aren't very into their stats when it comes to judging the performance, but even just I remember being at the Georgia game, the 1-0 win in the last campaign for the Euros under Martin O'Neill, where, yes, Ireland won 1-0, but Georgia had like 200 more passes than Ireland. They had more possession, they had more shots on goal, and it was a snatch and grab in the Aviva Stadium against Georgia. Whereas if you compare that against Portugal last night, Ireland had 12 shots, Portugal had 12 shots. Chances created, Ireland had 11 chances created. That's one more than Portugal did. They had 20 passes less than Portugal, 351 passes in total for Ireland. And then if you're just looking at the shot map, like, I mean, the XG was higher for Ireland. So if you believe in the XG model, then Ireland probably deserved to win that game last night.
And when have we ever said that where we would match a team like Portugal in the stats stake? We tend to raise our game against the bigger nations, but it's kind of backs to the wall and hope we grab something like Germany, the famous win over Germany, for example. And here we were going toe to toe. Okay, Portugal perhaps were okay, we're happy with a draw, but we weren't. We still had to take them on at home. So I thought it was a really impressive performance, and I saw a lot of comments online this morning. That's not always a gauge of the mindset of the football public, but people saying, I was against Kenny. I thought he was out of his depth. We weren't getting the results, but I've changed my mind. I've seen a lot of that this morning, and even watching on Sky, Richard Dunn, who's previously been quite critical of Stephen Kenny. He said he didn't think he saw any improvement. Last night he was kind of fulsome in his praise. And someone like John Walters as well online, who's perhaps been critical or saying he wasn't quite convinced. Last night, again, he was gushing in his praise of the performance. So he is winning people over.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. What is the perception of Stephen Kenny in England? Is there even a perception of him? Do people know who he is? Are people starting to figure out who he is, or what's the perception in England about of him?
They don't know who he is. And I was just Tuesday night, some work colleagues were asking me, so how are Ireland doing? And I told them, I think we're on the up. I said, I think Stephen Kenny is a bit of a visionary because he has said he wants to move away from the kind of the typical long ball, if you like. And they have just said that's great because that's all we've seen from Ireland for since Jack Charlton. The Jack Charlton documentary was aired again on BBC in the last couple of days, and a lot of people were talking about that again. Of course, we love Jack Charlton. Of course, we love that time, but we're almost pigeonholed into that. That was our style of football ever since. And here's a man who has come through the League of Ireland and is unashamedly saying, I want us to play a different way. And now we're starting to see the results of it.
Do you think he will get a new contract at the end of this? I mean, it's Luxembourg this weekend. It's a dead rubber game, but if Ireland win, they finish third. And I was just looking back at the previous World Cup campaign of 2014, because everyone compares Ireland to, or Stephen Kenny, essentially to Martin O'Neill. And the perception of Martin O'Neill is he got results, he got wins, he got results. May not have been pretty, but he got results. In 2014 for the World Cup campaign, Ireland had 4 wins, which is more than this campaign. But those 4 wins came against Faroe Islands and against another minnow team that is slipping my mind now. I probably should have written this down. But Faroe Islands was one of the two wins, and they finished 4th in a group of 6. Yeah. Ireland are about to finish 3rd in a group of 5. So it's not exactly forward momentum, but it's not regression either. So I think the perception of Stephen Kenny of someone who can't get results, who plays nice football, but doesn't get results, is probably not a correct one.
Yeah, if we win at the weekend, and we have been defeated by Luxembourg, I think perhaps what we are missing is that we did really well last night, but our players are operating at a much lower level. Like Ogbene, is he at Rochdale? Like this is Bazunu, excellent player. He's only 18, 19 years old. So Ida not perhaps playing at Norwich. So we went into the group as 3rd place seeds, and if we were to beat Luxembourg, that's where we will finish. And maybe there's a bit of a recalibration of our expectations that we actually weren't expected to be, certainly not in the kind of football ranking sense. We weren't expected to finish any higher than 3rd. We might still end up finishing 4th if we don't manage to do the business. But we also have to take into account this entire rebuilding process that Kenny took on himself to play the likes of Omobama, Delhi, Bazunu, teenagers, Ida, putting these guys in the team. Like it was very brave. He could have fallen on his sword with the results. He may yet, but I think at this point it would be extremely short-sighted for the FAI to pull the plug on the project or the process.
Yeah, it was Kazakhstan was the other team in 2014. I did write it down. I just forgot to just couldn't bring it up on memory. But yeah, it is definitely something that you need to consider. Perversely, what was perceived to be a good start to the campaign with Luxembourg and Qatar being the first teams to play actually ended up being reversed. If we played against Portugal first and the result wasn't the same, wasn't a win or was a loss, then the perception of how quickly or otherwise this team have been progressing might have been different, because if Luxembourg came 3 games later and Ireland were further down the road like they were against Portugal, they probably win that game against Luxembourg. So what you perceive to be a good start can often not be a good start, depending on how fast the project can move and how quickly these players are going to be able to get adapted to this new system. Because again, if you listen to like Shane Duffy or Josh Cullen or any of the players that have been in front of the media, they are very much of the opinion that this is a process and it's coming along the right way. Shane Duffy saying last night that if you don't think there's been progression, then you're writing and watching the wrong stuff. So I think at this point in time, if you are looking at this Ireland team, if you look at that performance from last night, and I don't want to overblow it was a draw, but if you look at the performance as it was and you think there has not been progression since the start of this Stephen Kenny campaign, then you're either not watching correctly or you're choosing to ignore what you're seeing.
Absolutely. And I think I think sometimes we speak in generalities, especially Irish football fans. A lot of fans look at the result, and so, my friend I was watching the match with last night said and I don't want to cast aspersions on all the Irish football mammies, because my football mammy is absolutely, or my Irish mammy is absolutely someone I can talk football with. But he made the point that she might poke her head into the living room and say, "Oh, we're 1-0 down. We mustn't be very good. Therefore, he's not very good." Like, football doesn't work like that. So a 0-0 draw with Portugal, in fact, was a very good performance. And I think if you look back, no one wants to do it, but if you actually went back and watched some of the whole matches under Martin O'Neill and Trapattoni, if anyone ever wants to do that, I mean, we're playing a different sport now. I always talk about the away leg against Denmark. Everybody talks about the 5-1 defeat in Dublin. The away leg in Denmark, in my opinion, was a shameful performance. It was 90 minutes of thumping the ball as far away from our goal as possible, not even attempting to try to win the game. And that, compared to what we were watching last night, it's just more enjoyable. And that's really why we watch football, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. If you take all the substance out and just focus on results, then what's the point? Like, that's not what football is about. Football, yes, it's about winning. It's about getting results. You want to see your team win, and ultimately, if you go a long period of time without a win and you're playing nice football, you're not really going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I do believe that you put the work in, and if you are playing a standard of football, then the results will come. And eventually, I do think you're seeing that the results sort of turn now, and hopefully they continue to improve, and hopefully they get a win against Luxembourg. Funny enough, you say going back to watch the Martin O'Neill games. I'm not going to do that, but what I am going to do, it's going to be a piece on off the ball. And again, some people will not like it, but some people will enjoy it. It's basically going to be a stats breakdown of the Martin O'Neill era versus the Stephen Kenny era so far. And obviously there's going to be context to that with the different players and things like that. But I think I haven't looked at the numbers just yet, but I think you will see a vast difference in what Ireland are trying to do versus what Ireland were trying to do under Martin O'Neill. So hopefully that will be coming on off the ball in the next couple of weeks. We do want to park the Stephen Kenny stuff and the Ireland stuff for now, though, because there is a new issue of Póg Mo Goal. I'm speaking to James Carew from Póg Mo Goal. We're going to take a quick break here, but we'll come back and we'll chat about some of the great pieces that's in the new issue of Póg Mo Goal. Stay tuned. Now you're welcome back to Team 33. Enda Coll here with you, and I'm joined on the line by James Carew, who is part of the Póg Mo Goal magazine, Ireland's only football magazine. There is a new issue out now, and I mean, it's full of great stuff. There's 74 pages of football writing. It's got writers from Ireland, from England, from Brazil, from Poland. There's stuff in there from people from Netherlands. You've got a real variety of stuff, from a piece on Ali Jah to Brian Kerr, to a brilliant article on the business of football boots and how that all ties it around. So, James, firstly, tell us a little bit about getting this series together. How difficult or otherwise was it to pull? I think is there 16 extra pages compared to the last series. So there's a great bulk of writing in this.
Yeah, 12 extra pages, and including your piece, which we might talk about, but we're delighted to have. I really like your piece, talking about the links between Donegal and Glasgow Celtic. But it's been a great, particularly over the last year and 18 months of lockdown, it's been obviously a great outlet for us to produce another magazine. But we're really pleased with this issue. We're always trying to up our game and improve it and have more contributors, more content. So yeah, we have extra pages. We're back stocked in Eason's around Ireland, which is brilliant for us. We had our last issue in Eason's. At the time, it was the restrictions in Ireland where people weren't really out and about in shops. So we're hoping that much more people discover us this time, especially in the run up to Christmas. It's a great line for us. I work in PR to say we're Ireland's only football magazine, but it's quite astounding, isn't it, that two brothers working out in our bedrooms, like literally, are producing this. But we're really pleased with it. And as ever, we're really pleased with the contributors who, as you have said, are from all over the world.
Yeah, well, we kind of spoke about substance, and in the world of football, there's not often so much substance in how quickly it moves. But the likes of this and the likes of the other series, there's so much great stuff in it that you can keep returning to it, and it's not something that's just thrown together in the space of a day by journalists who are over swamped and doing 15 other things at the one time. These are long form pieces that live on, and you can return to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a passion project. Football is our passion. I'm a trained journalist. I've worked in sports journalism, but my brother Key is a graphic designer, and this is intended to be a keepsake, almost like a coffee table anthology. That's what we're aiming for, and it's as much a piece of design as it is writing. We want the writing and the look and feel to complement each other, and it's like 6, 8, 12 months worth of work, not least from our contributors who really put their passion into it, to take the time to research, illustrators taking the time to research what the article is about. For example, we might take an article on Brian Kerr or a man named Jack Mitchell in Waterford, and give it to an artist from the other side of the world. And that's the collaboration that we're looking for. And it's a cliche that football is the universal language, but it is. You can take a piece of a club, the third biggest club in Krakow in Poland that we've got, for example, and yet when you delve into it, you get something that we find interesting, and therefore we hope others do.
Mm. We might start with your piece then, and it sort of ties in with our conversation around Stephen Kenny and what he's trying to achieve with the Irish team. It's called Greener on the Other Side, and it's about Brian Kerr, the man who, everybody loves him from his media days. You can still see him pictured standing on the terrace in St. Pat's in Richmond Park to go see the side that he used to manage. Tell us a little bit about this piece and why you wrote it.
I'm a big fan of Brian Kerr, and I think a lot of people feel with the shenanigans, if you like, of the FAI over recent times, and now with this supposedly new FAI, that Brian Kerr was a man who was unfortunately sidelined by the regime, that he has so much to offer Irish football with his knowledge. He's I write a kind of bordering on cybernetic knowledge of Irish footballers and the structures and what could and should be done. And so I just thought, especially for an international audience, and how it aligns with the conversations around Kenny, like Brian Kerr was unknown when he became, certainly outside Ireland, when he became the Irish manager. And I reference in the piece that some of the British tabloids had headlines of Brian who, like, who is this guy? And Brian Kerr faced those same questions that Kenny did. He came through the League of Ireland. Is he up to it? Is he out of his depth? The same kind of things that Kenny has to put up with now. And so I thought it was interesting to go back and give a profile of a man beloved, particularly in League of Ireland circles, and mirrors what Kenny is trying to achieve now and the path he has taken.
Yeah, there's a guy that most people will know from GAA circles, Cyril Farrell, the former Galway manager, and he has the same sort of knowledge of hurling as you'd say Brian Kerr. If you throw a question to Cyril about, the Kilkenny championship, he'd be able to tell you who played here and what players were good. And from 20 years ago, he'd be able to pick out someone that really stood out. And I feel like that's what Brian Kerr has as well, but to a broader stage, because you're talking about the most participated sport in Ireland in football. And I remember having a conversation with Brian Kerr on the way back from London. He was doing commentary on a game, and I was doing reports on a separate game, but we were sitting in the airport on the way back. And I was playing for Drumcondra AFC at the time, and got chatting to him about that. And he was telling me about the incredible history that they had. And he was picking out 5 or 6 players from 40 years ago that were standout players, and was telling me what they were like and the style of play they played. And his knowledge goes beyond what you would imagine anybody in Ireland really has of the Irish football scene.
Yeah, and I think Damien Duff even alluded to it when he was announced as Shelburne manager. Not only he was saying Tolka Park was a special place for him because of those underage games he played under Brian, but I think he also said that Brian Kerr knows every player in the world, and Damien needs to get to know the players in the Premier Division of Ireland. So I mean, you only have to listen to him. I think he's football presenters pose a question to him, but the level of detail is incredible. And I remember, I referenced at the start of the piece, I remember watching his unveiling as Irish manager live on Sky Sports News. And afterwards, the Sky Sports presenter said, "What a performance by Brian Kerr. The coronation," I think they called it, because he knew everyone in the room. He knew the journalists. He was able to talk about clubs, able to talk about players. And it was very much for people who came through the Irish system or working grassroots football. It was like, this is our man who's made it to the top. And that's why it has been frustrating to see him sidelined and what he could have offered. Although now, with Ruud Doctor having moved on, there are some whispers that this could be a role primed for Brian to step back in if that's something he wanted to do. I think we all think he has a lot to offer.
Yeah, it certainly seems that he should be involved in some way, shape, or form. And with the new regime in charge, maybe they will bring him back in as a gesture of goodwill. It's hard to tell how much has actually changed within the FAI without being inside of it. So maybe potentially it hasn't changed all that much. But before we finish up with Brian Kerr, I guess let's look back at him as a manager, because I mean, as people of a certain age, like myself, I was quite young when Brian Kerr was the Ireland manager. I was aware of it. I wasn't particularly, I wasn't really old enough to have a good grasp of what was going on and what kind of manager he was. But he was really successful with the underage teams, because you obviously have that story of the youth Euros. But I hadn't realized he was also successful at the Olympics as well with an underage side. And like, this wasn't a guy who stepped into a role that he was unqualified for. If you compare to the way the other nations act in terms of their managers, he was very well suited to this senior management role. He didn't just, he didn't luck his way into this.
Absolutely. And that's how I opened the article, was without mentioning his name. Here is a man who, at domestic level, I think was the first title for 4 decades with his club, which he followed up again a number of years later. He retook the league crown. Then he becomes technical director of his national association. He takes the under 16s and under 18 teams, makes them European champions, never before achieved by the country, and then is offered the national team job. Outside of Ireland, if you didn't know who he was, you would just say, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? And yet, Brian Kerr, yes, he's kind of heralded as our man, our domestic league man at the top, but didn't have universal backing. And that's referenced later in the piece, that Brian felt machinations within the FAI moved against him. And when his contract wasn't renewed, most people said, well, that's really unfortunate. And then he was completely sidelined until today. He's still sidelined to this day. I said in the piece, I think Brian said, when the new regime was introduced, he said, I might get a ticket now. And I've heard that said, former manager Owen Hand not getting tickets because he fell foul of the association. So that's the environment he had to come through and the structures he had to battle against.
And like, it's hard to tell what his regime was like as an Ireland manager. I feel like, again, it falls into the bracket of Stephen Kenny and the disdain to which Irish people hold the League of Ireland, that even though the results may not have been all that different to previous regimes, sort of like Stephen Kenny's results are not all that different to Martin O'Neill's, because he doesn't have that level behind him where he went across the water and has success. People are automatically against him, and there's already sort of, if you want to imagine in football terms, he's already at a 5-0 loss record before he even has his first game.
Absolutely. And I do understand, like, you know, the League of Ireland is a certain level, but Roy Keane came through the League of Ireland. Seamus Coleman came through. James McClean. Half the team now came through the League of Ireland. Gavin Bazunu. You know, and it's often said that Irish kids are not going over to England anymore. We know the League of Ireland is raising in standard. It's becoming a much more, Daniel MacDonald often says on Off the Ball, it's becoming a much more technical league, much younger league. And so that's, Kenny has come through that. I've been thinking a lot about this in recent days. In other sports, hurling, Gaelic football, horse racing, golf, Ireland produces from our own pool world talent, and yet if we do it through football and they don't go to England, suddenly everybody dismisses it. So, you know, what's stopping a technical coach like Stephen Kenny, who managed in the Europa League group stages, got results in the Europa League? If you do it with a League of Ireland side, surely that says you're even better at this coaching game, because you're getting players of a perceived lower standard to perform at this elite level.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the way it is at the minute. I think it'll take decades to shape the opinion of people who, but I mean, I don't even know if you're ever going to shape the opinion of those who just love the Premier League. And I mean, I have no qualms against people who watch the Premier League. I watch the Premier League. I support a Premier League club, but I also support an Irish club. But I think we're at a level now where even like the top 6 teams, it's a completely different level of support. It's a different mentality to the sport. Anything outside of that is just not good enough. It's sort of the idea that, you know, like of course Steven Gerrard, for example, is going to go to Aston Villa from Rangers. Of course he is, but the only reason is that is money. Like, I mean, like really and truly, that's what it comes down to. But people, it's the perception of the Premier League as the be all and end all of world football now that it's gonna be difficult to work against this, no matter how far Irish football comes. I think. We'll move on to another couple of pieces. Which one do you want to go to next?
Well, do you want to look at yours?
We'll look at mine. We'll take a look at mine. So I'll give you the synopsis of the piece. It's called Little Donegal, and you might have heard Kieran Cunningham talk about this in passing on the Mount Rushmore series that we did on Off the Ball during the first lockdown. It's essentially a detail of the Irish connection, the Donegal connection with Glasgow, and how that has influenced Irish football and how Ireland has influenced, or Donegal in specific has influenced Glasgow. So if you look at the final paragraph, I think it sums up what the piece is all about. Basically, Charlie Gallagher, Bernie Slavin, Ray Houghton, Owen Coyle, Tommy Coyne, Aidan McGeady, James McCarthy, 7 sons of Donegal with Glasgow accents. So that's sort of what the piece is about. It's about the link between the two of them and how Irish immigrants affected Glasgow and how Glasgow then returned that favour with Irish football.
Yeah, and I didn't know the depth of the connection there. Obviously, we kind of, you know, like Ray Houghton, know his father's from Donegal, but then your piece explains in daily life how connected the two locations are. I think you said like there's a bus service, or there was a bus service. So like I'm a goalkeeper. Packy Bonner is my sporting hero and always will be. And your piece references like going to Glasgow to go on trial with Celtic. But for people in Donegal, going to Glasgow was a part of everyday life. People went there for work. People went there to visit family. Cousins who lived there came back every summer to Donegal. And so I wasn't aware of how strong those roots were, and your piece brings it to life.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I'm obviously, people have heard me talk about it enough that I support Celtic. They've been my number one team. And the number one question I always get is, why do people in Donegal all support Celtic? Why is that link there? And it is passing. It's not as strong as it once was, but I mean the connection's unbelievable. I'll bring you through the history of it. Essentially, an area called the Rosses, which is Glenties and Gweedore. It's in the northwest of Ireland, and it all started with what were called tatty pickers, and if you know the slang, tatty is another word for potato. It also was in Mayo as well. They would go over to Scotland in the 20th century to be tatty pickers, essentially pick the potatoes, and it was such a normal thing to go from Donegal to Glasgow that there was a bus service that you referenced. It was called Bus Glasgow in Irish, so Glasgow, or I don't know how you pronounce it in Gaeilge, but it then entrenched itself in life, in everyday life. So, for example, the different slang terms that we use. I recently did. I'm not sure if you came across the New York Times dialect quiz that they did. So they had one where you basically answer, I think it's 100 questions or something on your dialect, and it gives you a map then of the world of where your dialect matches up with. And mine was more in Scotland than it was in Ireland.
Wow.
It was Donegal, Mid Ulster, and then Glasgow. So that's how much it comes into everyday life. And then the funniest part is Tennent's is the lager of choice. I don't think it would be anybody else's lager of choice except for Donegal and Glasgow.
Yeah. And your piece, sometimes when we've talked about like the granny rule or whatever, people can be dismissive of it. But in the case of people like McGeady and James McCarthy, and who have that Donegal connection, it was never really in doubt that they would play for Ireland, because their families have such a strong connection to that part of Ireland. And I think your piece talks about Owen Coyle is the first. Your piece is called Little Glasgow, or Little Donegal, sorry, an area of Glasgow. And Owen Coyle is the person who mentions it in the piece, because it was kind of like you had to be tough, and the Irish stuck together over there, but the connection was so strong. There was never really a doubt that these players, the sons of immigrants, would grow up and play for Ireland, even if sometimes, as you say, on this side of the Irish Sea, maybe their loyalty has been questioned.
Yeah, James McCarthy is an interesting one in particular, because I feel like because his performances didn't match up to what he was doing at club level, people always had this perception of him that he only chose Ireland because he couldn't get into the Scotland team, which, I mean, I think is horrendously unfair on a player like James McCarthy, who was playing for Everton when he first came across to Ireland. And he's very much in the same boat as Aid McGeady, who was over and back to Donegal the entire time throughout his childhood with his family. His family were all from Donegal. And the little Donegal area in Glasgow is an area called Gorbals, which is, it would have been considered probably a slum, if you want to use that term, public housing, if you want to use the kind term. But it was a rough area. It was a place where Irish immigrants who obviously did not have much money went over to, and they had a community. And that's what Owen Coyle grew up in. James McCarthy grew up in a similar area to that as well, the same area that a couple of Leeds players grew up in as well. It was just a football zone. And then it just culminates in the Irish football team. Then you have players like Charlie Gallagher, who was one of the Lisbon Lions, Bernie Slavin, Owen Coyle was he was short-lived in his Irish career, but Aid McGeady he's in the top 5 or top 6 of Ireland caps when it comes to his appearances for Ireland. So it definitely does work both ways. It doesn't we're not just sending people out to these countries. They come back and they want to represent Ireland. Sort of like the area of Preston that Kevin Kilbane grew up in. Like he talks about that. He says that there was absolutely no doubt that he was Irish growing up, even though he had an English accent. He knew that in the area everyone else was Irish. It wasn't a question of was he ever going to play for England? It was, I'm Kevin Kilbane, I'm from Ireland. Why would I play for England?
Yeah. And it's something that's not really explored too much in Irish culture, I think. I'm living here in the UK almost 12 years, and without kind of going into the Grealish-Rice conversation, the Irish British, if you like, the people who grow up in England with Irish parents and grandparents, their story is never really explored too much. It's kind of like, well, of course you were going to play for Ireland, and if you played for England, you're almost like traitor to the cause. And it's much more nuanced than that. They are from both countries. They are from both cultures. And I think what your piece does is, while those players were always going to play for Ireland, it just shows that those connections go both ways. And I think it's something that perhaps we could explore more in Irish media or cultural life.
Yeah, I think you have to take into account when and where these people move to as well, because Glasgow is a very separated city. To this day, there is still anti-Catholic sentiment, anti-Irish sentiment within certain parts of the city. So they didn't just face everyday life; they faced a tough life in the sense of racism and what other Irish players face to this day, even with James McClean in certain quarters. And I think that's what, Jack Grealish and Declan Rice, how they differ to the likes of Kevin Kilbane, the likes of Gary Breen and Aidan McGeady, James McCarthy, these guys who grew up in areas and times where Irish people were so together and in a really tight-knit community because they had to be for their own safety and for their own sense of being. Whereas, Jack Grealish, he grew up as an English person. He didn't really grew up as an Irish person in an Irish community that happened to be in England. So I think that's where things differ when it comes to them. And actually, I wanted to touch a little bit more on Póg Mo Goal, but now that we're talking about this, you were at a Wigan game recently enough with James McClean now playing for them. So how was that? How was he perceived there?
Yeah, so I live in an area close to where Wimbledon are back playing in the old plough lane, and they've redeveloped it. So it's a nice, tidy little ground, and it's quite a nice day out to go along and League One or whatever. Wimbledon were hopeless, I have to say, but it was a nice day out. But yeah, they were playing Wigan, who I think are top of that division now, and James McClean was one of the standout players there. But we happened to have seats right in the front row by the corner flag, and James takes a lot of the corner kick. So we saw it firsthand. It's just like people say around this time of year, November, it starts up with the poppy thing with McClean. It isn't just November. It's every week at every away ground he goes there. It's just mob mentality. It's just like, oh, it's in the media that we have to boo McClean, so everybody does it, and it was kind of disgusting, I have to say. And we were so close to him that when the boos were kind of going up, we were like, Jimmy, we love you. Don't listen to these guys. And then you heard other Irish accents around you, kind of shouting stuff like someone was shouting Mayo for Sam and this kind of stuff. But you kind of realize that. There's so many Irish in London and so many Irish at all these games. Why would they participate in this? And it really, I have to say, it really turned me against supporting Wimbledon that day. And James McClean got on the score sheet. One guy, I won't repeat what he said, took it upon himself to walk up out of the stand and up to the fence and shout at him. And he was escorted away by stewards. I don't know if he was thrown out, but it just gave you an insight that he's not just putting up with this every November. He's putting up with this every single week, and we saw that firsthand.
That's quite interesting. Was anybody like did the people in the stands who were shouting this abuse notice you guys, and like, did they acknowledge the fact that there might be Irish people standing beside them when they're shouting this kind of thing?
Well, possibly. We were vocal in our support for him. Nobody had a go at us. Wimbledon feels a little bit of a sedate kind of atmosphere. It's kind of a nice club back where they are, very small ground. Maybe there's a hardcore element who might have had words with us. We were directly in front of a steward who was a young guy. And he asked us, why are they booing McClean? He didn't know. And we said, the poppy thing. And he said, well, he should wear the poppy, shouldn't he? And I said, maybe read up on it, son. And he was a lovely chap, but it's just kind of like, they don't even know why they're doing it now. It's just, that's what you do. You boo James McClean.
Yeah. Well, I mean, James McClean not wearing the poppy is less, in my opinion, it is less of a thing where it goes against the ethos of it to what some of the British people are doing right now, dressing themselves fully in poppies. I think that's more disrespectful than anything James McClean has ever done. It's become just a thing where get as many poppies onto you as possible, and the message has been completely lost regardless of whether you agree with the message anyway. But let's finish up with the Póg Mo Goal issue then. Is there anything else you want to highlight in it before we finish up?
Well, I am biased, but I do think it's the best one yet. I think the look of it is incredible. We're so pleased with the illustrations and the photography. It's got that mix again, as you say, of the short form. You can jump in, read the short form articles, come back, maybe spend some time on the longer ones. So just as a little taster, that in some of those short form articles, Boca juniors, for example, I think there's a kind of urban legend that they're blue and gold because of a Tipperary connection. I believe there is a Tipperary connection, a former coach. But the reason they wear blue and gold, which I didn't know, was because they used to wear black and white, and so did another team in that area in the city in Argentina. So they played a game to decide who could keep the colors, and Boca lost, and then decided they would adopt the colors of the next ship to come into port, and it happened to be from Sweden. So that's why they wear blue and gold. And it's just, I think those little things are fascinating. That article originally started out as an exploration of the club crest, but when you take a little detailed look, you find a little nugget that takes you off on a completely different direction. And I love that kind of stuff. I think that's the glory of creating a piece like this, that you just find so many brilliant stories from different parts of the world. And as we always do, there's a great mix of Irish content in there as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because the Boca kit is definitely one of the nicest kits on the planet at the minute, if you're being unbiased about it. And also there is definitely an Irish connection in Argentina. I think there's actually a similar enough area to Little Donegal in Argentina, not Little Donegal, but in terms of the Irish names, the slang they use, I think there's a weird connection there somewhere. I presume it would come from famine times and the famine ships going all over the place with the British. But I have not explored that. I am speculating, but I
think there's teams called Higgins FC, named after an admiral in the Navy. There's an Argentinian restaurant around here, and I got talking to him about the magazine, and his club is Vélez Sarsfield, which is clearly got an Irish connection. So that's definitely one for a future edition.
Yeah, we'll have a look into that. James Carew from Póg Mo Goal, Ireland's only football magazine. You can get it in Eason's, or you can get it online as well. I'll put a link into the podcast description as well if you want to have a look for that. It's well worth, and it's well worth the purchase, and also it would make a great stocking filler as well for Christmas if anybody is interested in football. So James, thanks very much for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Enda. It's a pleasure.
Cheers. Okay, that is Póg Mo Goal. You can get that in Eason's or online as well. We'll take a quick break here, and we'll be back after these.